and 21 and 22 have, are trading at about a third of their IPO value. So crowdfunding, you guys know about crowdfunding. The reason I talk about crowdfunding here is because if you have access to the internet, no matter where you are around the globe, you can start a company. The barriers to entry to start a company have gone basically to zero as long as you have access to the internet. And so we now have this proliferation of entrepreneurs across the globe. I think that's a great thing. I think the fastest way to economic development success is by having more and more companies start and have the ability to scale. And I want those companies built in every corner of Chicago, every neighborhood of Chicago, every corner of the state, and of course across the globe. Kickstarter you're familiar with, and maybe perhaps you have participated in some of their projects. More than $7 billion pledged over, close to 600,000 projects. Okay. So I have a rule of thumb. I've said that. Oh, can you see it? It's very light. Can you see it up here? Okay. My rule of thumb is if the pace of change inside of your house is slower than the pace of change outside of your house, you are, by definition, on a downward slope. We'll talk about it in a minute, but the most successful companies in the world have to be the ones that are most concerned about disruption. Why? Does anyone have an idea? Right. And they have not yet had their revenue disrupted. The ones that have had their revenue disrupted are trying every possible thing to adjust their business model, cut their price, change their cost structure, launch new products, right? They're spinning. So the most successful companies in the world are the ones that have to be the most paranoid about about what's happening in the world. This was a hard conversation to have inside of the university. And some of you here represent IIT. It's a hard conversation to have inside the academy because, education typically doesn't think like this. By the way, many corporates don't think like this either because they think they're invincible, no matter what the proof points are around them. So I have two themes we're going to talk about today before we go to sort of some practical next steps and I close. The first is this one, that the global customer base is exploding. Right now we are at about 5 billion, just over 5 billion people across the globe have access to the internet. Over the next couple of years, all 8 billion people are going to have access to the internet. That's 3 billion new customers, potentially, for organizations to tap into. What does that mean? When all 8 billion people are connected to the internet, by the way, this is happening because of all the satellite work that's been going on, and Elon Musk's Starlink, and Alphabet for a while had Project Loon, which were those stratospheric balloons that were hanging over Puerto Rico and Kenya that were giving Wi-Fi connectivity. That project itself has shut down, but this idea that it's important for everybody on Earth to be connected to the internet is dominant, and this changes education, this changes healthcare, this changes infrastructure, this changes how people move into the middle class, this changes talent. COVID changed how many companies thought about talent being distributed. Once you got the war for talent is going to exponentially change once everybody's connected to the internet. And I don't think many people are talking about this, or at least many people in my world aren't talking about this. And I think that I'm always surprised by that. And when you think about cybersecurity, right, this increases the challenge even more. The second theme is one about convergence. A lot of the people that I work with right now and a lot of the companies that you see be successful, they are themselves not developing new technology. We talked about this a second ago and how new business models are forming. They are putting things together in different ways that haven't been put together before. So let's do an example. All right, you take broadband, digital cameras, cheap memory, laptops, machine learning, and user-generated content. What company does that build? YouTube? Okay. Anything else? TikTok? Do I hear something on this side? You guys are talking very quietly, at least, or there's a sound barrier that comes to the stage. So my example here is YouTube. TikTok would also fit this. Agreed. All right, how about one more? GPS, Google Maps, 4G, smartphones, machine learning, and the gig economy. Uber. Yeah, you guys are good. Uber. So the point is, a lot of the people that I'm working with, a lot of the companies that are coming to fruition are thinking about these building blocks in different ways than have been before versus building all of it themselves. We talked about this a second ago. So that means to me that your job is really hard. Your job, and I don't know what all of your jobs are, of course, but whether your job is sitting in a CISO seat or a business development seat or a strategy role or a line role, whatever it is, your job is getting exponentially hard because you have, there's probably obvious reasons for all of you, but from my perspective, you've got to focus on delivering the day-to-day, and you have to be paying attention and understanding all these other changes that are coming and how they might impact you. And my guess is that that you as a leader and or the leadership teams that you work with are constantly putting pressure on these things, and sometimes they think that they're small and sometimes they think that they're big, but nobody, in most organizations, nobody really owns that. When I ask most companies who owns innovation, the answer is everybody. And what happens when everybody owns it? Nobody owns it. So when you look at the companies who actually invest in innovation, more than half of them struggle to bridge the gap between innovation strategy and business strategy. By show of hands, has this happened in the organizations that you are connected to? A couple of you? All right, why? Tell me why you think that's happening. If you're willing to share. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And some of it is rightfully so, because everybody, based on, their learning, their technical or their business abilities, they think they have the right approach and idea.
Yep.
And really, when you start getting to where you're cooperating and listening, I think that's where those breakdowns come in and move forward together.
Yep, I think very well said.
Still struggling with that leadership process.
Yep, I would agree. What else? Excellent. We're going to come back to that point in just a second. You had your hand raised? No? Okay, go ahead.
Business strategy. One said ROI, known up front. Innovation, well, if you knew what you're doing, it wouldn't be research.
Agreed. All right, yep. Cobalt, okay. Yep, I agree. All right. Any last comments before I share a perspective? Yeah.
I think one of the things that I always struggled with was we've got people in the business who want to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
And as a security person, I look at it and I go, but you're not considering all this stuff. And if we're not at the table when you're ideating and,
Yep.
innovating, then you're going to be, it's the same thing with business strategy or cybersecurity. that you're gonna be over here and you're not gonna be aligned, so.
Agreed. Okay, we're gonna do this one and then that one, and then I'm gonna show you my perspective.
Sometimes innovation does all of these mean it's gonna grow your revenue, get more market share, it may help satisfaction,
Sure.
increase your, what's that, CI
Yeah.
score,
Or internal satisfaction, right?
or lift your margin a little bit, but it's not always, way out that way.
I 100% agree. Okay, in the back?
I'll say that another way. It's hard to innovate, it's even harder to figure out how to monetize it.
Yes. All right, so I'm going to show you a framework. So this goes to in the khaki jacket right here. I think your point, right? Innovation is about exploration. It's not an execution challenge. And every company, small or big, let's take big companies for a second though. How many of you work at like a Fortune 500 or like large? A couple of you? Okay. They were all once an idea. Might have been 100 years ago, but at one point they were an idea, right? They were in the exploration chain. Almost all companies are focused on execution. They're hitting a quarterly number, whether they're public or not. They have different expectations that they are managing to. And what happens? So when you are on an innovation journey, there's the explorer where you're searching. You've got a problem that you think you need to solve, and you're coming up with potential solutions. But when you are a full company already, you are likely, well, I know you're certainly focused on exploiting what you have, managing and execution. And when you're in execution mode, you got key performance indicators, right? You are focused on efficiency. Explorers focus on growth. Stock market versus a VC style kind of investment structure. Failure is not an option. Who lives in a world where failure is not an option? Most of you, right? If not all of you. Even just rationally, as people, we don't like to fail, right? Detail orientation, rigorous process. You're hiring people because of their ability to do that kind of work. You want them to come in and kind of be part of that work versus big picture, ambiguous, open. The big question for companies is how do you do both at the same time? Very few companies have figured this out. I would put Kellogg Consumer Packaged Good Company as high on that list, and we can talk about why that is in just a second. Yeah. For sure.
And I thought, as I saw more of them closing, I thought that would be a wake-up call, but it hasn't been. So you can elaborate on that as you go through the presentation.
Yeah, I will come to that as I come to sort of my point of view on things that you guys can do, and I'll try to tie it together to the Blockbuster story or the Kodak story. Although frankly, Kodak has had a couple of resurgences with. They had a COVID vaccine, they had a crypto coin, right? Kodak keeps like sort of showing up in sort of odd spaces, but I will try to address it, but I'm happy to talk about it more separately, okay? All right, so some of you talked about this broadly, kind of broadly, that you have to, the return on investment question, right? In order to get investment dollars to do something, that you have to believe that it's gonna work. How many people work in organizations or have in their past worked in organizations where you have to kind of prove that it's going to be successful before you get the opportunity to do it? Right? As a McKinsey consultant, we were constantly telling clients, you should do X, Y, Z, and they're like, we're not going to do that until you prove to us that it's going to work. Well, we can't until you try it. And the myth of the magical idea, the myth of the one thing that's going to unlock growth or a different level of success. So how many, if you were going to place a whole bunch of bets, and let's assume that they're $1 million bets, you could make them $1,000 bets. I don't care. I just use $1 million for the slide. How many bets do you have to make to get one that is has a unicorn level outcome based on venture capital returns? 1,000? What else? How about the number I'm thinking about is less than 1,000. Anyone else want to guess? 100? All right. So it's 250, although the chart doesn't, is it? Maybe if I put on my glasses, my vision would be better. So 162 are going to fail, boom, right off the bat. Not necessarily immediately, but in the period of time. 87 will have some level of success. And one will be a unicorn. So when you get told, like there is no shortcut to figuring out which is the one that's gonna work. And so what does that mean in terms of how your own business practices work? How do you create an energy around innovation inside of your shop? Because you cannot not have innovation if you want to live, if you want to survive, if you want to get, to your point, if you want to get through the next several decades. And so here's what we know. And I'll try to, again, I'm not going to talk about why Kodak and Blockbuster and name the other companies. I'm not going to talk about why they failed. I'm going to share with you our perspective on how you can try to avoid failing, okay? So, teams that use their purpose, 60% more successful than teams that don't. Now let's talk about this idea thing I just talked about. Teams that explore, so how many of you have done like ask the team for input on ideas to, about what to do next, right? And then you've got some process by which those ideas get winnowed down and you choose an idea or you choose a handful of ideas. What this is saying is don't choose one, choose 5 or more. Now, are there capacity constraints on that? Yes, we'll talk about that in a second. I'm not saying spend more money. I'm saying make smaller bets across more things. Because you just don't know what's going to be successful, per the earlier point. Tell stories about what didn't work. Communicate and celebrate productive trials that did not work. When I was at Northwestern, we launched a best failure forum. I was the chief innovation officer at the time, and every quarter, it was an idea that came from one of my teammates, every quarter we would have people share things that they tried and what they learned from the trial. As the chief innovation officer, I had people that were afraid to try things. As the CEO of 1871, whose only job is innovation, I have a team that is afraid to try things. That is human nature. We don't wake up in the morning excited to try things that we don't know if it'll work. And most of our internal systems reinforce that. Most internal performance management systems do not have a squishy part that talks about failure. They don't. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but they don't exist. And so trying to normalize that is a good, in my opinion, a good thing to do because it'll get more people comfortable. And then, of course, you can't bang them later in a performance review. Yeah? Right. The groups that we typically work with, each idea in the beginning has probably 2 or 3 people attached to it. In the beginning, just in the beginning, and then you kind of have stage gates and you see what works and you stop certain ones and you add more people to the team as they grow. These are really small at the beginning, at least the way that I'm articulating it here. Because I agree with you, it becomes a capacity constraint, and I'm going to come back to that point in just a second. Teams that work collaboratively in flexible workspace, more successful than those that don't. This has changed a bit. because of the pandemic, right? We know the research is clear. I'm sure faculty at IIT have done lots of research on this, that proximity to people increases the likelihood of innovation and good ideas making it through all of the hurdles. We're all figuring this out now that the world has gone hybrid, right? When everything was all in person, modality-wise, pretty straightforward. When everything went virtual, modality-wise, pretty straightforward for those of us that were able to go virtual. Not every job was, of course. Now we're in this mix. And the demand side, or the job seeker, or the employer side, employee side, have very different views on how they want to work and how they want to show up. Right? It's probably, something I struggle with. I don't struggle so much with my team. I struggle with it with people not wanting to physically be at 1871. So some of you had raised your hand that you were at 1871, likely before the pandemic, right? Hundreds of people there at any given time. We're at about 150 a day. It's real quiet. It's 100,000 square feet. 150 people over 100,000 square feet. They can separate fast, right? It's real quiet. Last point, which is really important, the words failure and the words innovation are inseparable. You cannot have innovation without failure. And that is something that groups need to get comfortable with if they plan to drive change. And you can drive change that isn't necessarily innovation, right? But you cannot have innovation without failure. It's how you react to that failure that you have to deal with. Yeah. Only on the early stage folks, only on the people that started their business with us, not for people that joined us after they already had customers and revenue. And the way we define it, it's a kind of a blunt instrument metric. It's, are you alive or not? So it's not as articulate as probably your question is asking for. Yeah, sure. We've had about 1,340 or 1,350 companies have started at 1871 who are no longer at 1871. So just very quickly, pre-pandemic, since we only had early stage, people left after early stage. Now that we have the whole process, in theory, if your company stays alive, you should never have to leave. But we're still figuring that out. It doesn't work yet. Just like alumni of IIT technically are connected to the university for life, but some are very active and some are not, right? That's just, we're still figuring out. Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. So of the 1,340, 853 are still operating and running and have people employed. So you guys, you do the math for me. 850 over 1,300 is 59 or 58%, something like that. Across any industry you can imagine. And I'm going to get kicked off the stage here in just a few minutes. So I'm going to go for a few more minutes, and then we'll close off. Okay, so what do you do? So the first is you got to take a point of view of where the world is going, and how you're going to, what is the problem that you're solving? The question that I say to my team more often than anything else, day in and day out, is what problem are you solving? Because we tend not to solve the real problem. We tend to solve the symptom of the problem, not the actual root cause. And so you got to figure out what problem you're solving, where you think where is the puck going, to quote Wayne Gretzky, and how might you use innovation to respond. You have to figure out a way to continuously generate new ideas. You got to do this authentically, so you're not constantly ask people for their input and then do nothing with them and never tell them about it, right? Because that gets weary and people stop doing it, and then people don't believe you, and then it impacts, all kinds of internal satisfaction scores. I'm saying you have to. In my view, I would encourage you to build in the opportunity and the urgency to act on selected ideas. The number of times that I was chosen or that I raised my hand to participate in sub-teams, whether it was at GE or McKinsey or Northwestern, but then weren't giving any relief from the other stuff I had to do, so all that stuff became out of hide, and then it just gets elongated, right? And then there is no urgency. And then 18 months later, you're still sort of kicking around the fact that this idea was floated in a meeting 18 months prior. Reframe the investment discussion. So, you've got clarity about hypotheses and what money is actually required to test versus just dumping a bunch of money into, giving a bunch of money to a team and having them go run. And then this notion of communication and spreading the ideas. Just very quickly, this is what 1871 does try to do it on one page. For those of you that are familiar with 1871 but haven't been near us over the last couple years, this will be different for you. For those of you that don't know what we are, or haven't had exposure to us, you'll learn along the way. So we have, I don't know, okay, sorry. So I think I need bifocals, side note, but, okay, so we've got early stage startups, that's really a person, right, that's usually one person. Growth stage, late stage corporate, talked about those already. We've got specific products and services that we do for each of those individual groups, and then we do have things that cut across. The one that's probably more interesting for this group is our innovation labs. We kicked off our Artificial Intelligence Innovation Lab last week. The summit is on June 29th. The summit is free. It's open to the public. Thank you. Free, open to the public. If you're interested, you can, I don't know if the registration for the summit is up yet, but the lab is 4 weeks over a 13-week period, and each of those weeks we've got 15 or so public events. Those are free. You can show up in person, you can log in virtually, you can participate and be part of that audience if you want to be. The next ones coming up are food tech and supply chain, and then after that, blockchain and insurance. That's 2023. Again, your company could participate as a partner in it, or you as an individual or members of your team can participate for free. Those are your choices. The website has the information. You can do your thing, 1871.com. Do a bunch of stuff in Affinity, a bunch of stuff on talent with respect to recruiting early stage, young, when I say early stage, young talent, young, innovative, entrepreneurial talent. Inside of each of the innovation labs, we have tech challenges. So we've got an AI tech challenge that's launching on May 5th. If you are trying to hire young, technical talent, we're still figuring out what the focus is. There might be two. There might be one on prompt engineering, and there might be one on building certain models. We're figuring that out, but like those are things that you guys can participate in as members of the broader community. And then a million things going on all the time with inside that community bucket, of which a huge portion is public. Right? We are a nonprofit. My job is to try to help as many people as possible be successful. We don't get any government money, so we work with corporates who pay us money, and we have membership that people pay us money, and then we have a whole bunch of other things that people just participate for free. You guys figure out what bucket you want to be in, that's fine. I would just like you to be helping. If you want to be a mentor, great. If you want to be, if you want any of those things. Okay, so here are my closing thoughts, because I got the warning. Look, pace of change never higher. Level of complexity never greater. Level of ambiguity never greater. However, I believe in an abundant world, and I think the opportunity is boundaryless. I think the pairing of people and technology, right now, we can solve every problem on Earth if we want to. And that, I think, that gives me tons of energy, tons of hope, like I said, abundant thinking about what is possible in our lifetimes. much less the life that we leave for our children and grandchildren and the folks to come. But the world needs to focus on problems that actually matter. This is not a soapbox comment. You can build whatever company you want. But I want to see more companies being built to focus on problems that really matter. And to the point where people's lives have legitimately have the opportunity to be better. Right? We can have I'm addicted to Twitter, or now they took out the W. I'm not going to say the word, but like, it's just, it's craziness, but I still go to it. That's not making my life better. I probably shouldn't say that out loud. Don't quote me on that, please. Somebody a couple of you made the point of having IT and business being connected, right? We need people that are cross-functional at the same side of the table. We need a shared vocabulary. So when we talk about things, we know what metric we're going after. We need people with lots of different perspectives, wherever those perspectives come from, if they're like the identity-based perspectives or experience-based perspectives or geographical-based perspectives. I don't care. I just want a bunch of diverse, in any way you describe it, sitting on the same side of the table, working on solving problems that you're aligned on that you think matter. And with that, I will say thank you for letting me spend your Tuesday morning with you. Here's my information. That's my email, my Twitter handle, and then you can ping me on LinkedIn as well. I can be kind of pokey on email. Just know that. I will get to you, but I can be a little. If my team was here, they'd say I could be a little pokey. All right. Thanks, everybody. Oops, I don't know how to get off of that one.
All right, thank you again for a wonderful presentation by Betsy Ziegler, the CEO of 1871. Now we're going to be moving into our first panel regarding cybersecurity compliance. To moderate the panel, we have from the Illinois Institute of Technology, Ray Tregstad. Thank you.
Yeah, come up. Want to invite my panel to come on up and have a seat, please. While my panel's getting seated, I'll reintroduce myself. I am Ray Trigstad. I'm the Associate Chair of the Department of Information Technology and Management at Illinois Tech, one of the founding members of that department, and I'm also Associate Director of our Center for Cybersecurity and Forensics Education. I've been involved in cybersecurity for a long time, and I started, honestly, in compliance as an information systems security officer for one of the largest aviation training squadrons in the Navy, way back, okay? So I'd like to do a quick introduction of our panel and then get right into our questions. First, Elizabeth Ogunti started her information technology career as a help desk technician over 25 years ago and is now the Chief Information Security Officer for JBT Corporation's Global Information Security Program. Chuck Ruling has been the Chief Information Security Officer for Cook County Government since 2018. Chuck came to Illinois after working for the federal government and retiring from the military in 2011. Bruce Coffing has over 25 years of experience in information technology and cybersecurity with positions at Bank of America and Accenture, and currently serves as the Chief Information Security Officer for the City of Chicago. Richard Warner has been a professor at Illinois Tech's Chicago-Kent College of Law since 1990 and is the faculty director of the Center for Law and Computers. Rich is the co-author of a couple recent books, The Privacy Fix, How to Preserve Privacy in the Onslaught of Surveillance, and Cybersecurity Cases and Commentary. He's our panel's legal expert on compliance. Right? So I'm going to jump right in with some questions, and I'm going to start each question with directing it at one member of the panel and then let other folks jump in from there. So I'm start with Chuck. Chuck, what do you feel are the goals, purposes, and benefit of compliance?
All right, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. So I've worked in my last few years in security actually trying to take compliance out of my vocabulary. Because I felt compliance for compliance sake didn't make sense. But I understand there's a number of you out there that wouldn't even be able to have a discussion with me if compliance wasn't in my vocabulary. So I'm slowly trying to get it back into my vocabulary. Oop, apparently I don't talk loud enough. But to me, compliance, the real goal, the real reason for compliance is to get your level of risk of operating your information system down to an acceptable level. You're never going to get it to zero. I don't care if you've checked every box in your list of compliance. You will just never get there. But you want to take the limited resources you have within your organization. You want to put them and focus them in the right direction to mitigate risk down to the lowest level possible, again, based on the resources you have available. At the government, you know, I've never been in a job that had unlimited resources, ever. So you literally have to utilize compliance or your frameworks, your risk frameworks, to get your information systems, again, operating at a level that your business, whether it be government, whether it be private industry, is operating at a level of risk that your stakeholders are comfortable with. And that's, to me, that's the goal of compliance.
Anyone else like to comment on this?
I'll chime in. Hello, everybody. Okay. So I agree with what you stated about compliance, but I just wanted to add also, in my opinion, compliance gives you a common goal for your IT organization or your business as a whole of a standard or rules that you can follow and have your entire organization be on one page. If you choose NIST or whatever, that is our goal. Those are the controls that we have to get to a certain level of risk within the organization. So for me, it helps to focus everyone on a specific goal when it comes to like IT controls and whatnot.
And I 100% agree with the comments. I just wanted to add that a crucial element of reducing risk is having enough information about what the risks are, right? And so another goal of compliance you see in the statutes and regulations is information sharing, because you need a picture of across the organizations and across the internet of what the patterns of risk are. So information sharing is another critical goal of compliance, and sometimes problematic in the private sector.
Okay, our next question, I'm going to ask Elizabeth to take this one first. Being our representative of the private sector on this panel, how do the compliance efforts differ between government and private industry?
Well, I am in the private sector, but we also have government contracts, so we're on both sides. I don't think that they differ so much, because you still have to be in compliance with whatever body it is that you must follow, right? So if it's the government, it might be CMMC, which is what they brought up now. If it's the private sector, it could be SOX. It could be some other framework or some other standard that you have to follow. So I don't think it differs so much on either side, actually. You still have to maintain that level of risk, and you still have to be in compliance with that, whatever particular standard it is that your business, because even on like the food side or the produce side, you still have rules and regulations from higher organizations that you have to be in compliance with in order to be a profitable organization.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. You know, whether you're in the government or in the private sector, if you're taking a credit card, you have to comply with PCI. PCI
Exactly.
is PCI irrespective of whether, you know, we don't get special dispensation because we're the government, right? So, yeah, so, and the same thing in terms of, you know, echoing your comment from before, choosing your framework and building to that, that goal, whether, you know, it's NIST 171 or 853 or cybersecurity framework or CMMC, you know, whatever you've selected, you're building towards that. And, you know, that's common throughout, whether you're public sector or private sector.
Any other comments before we move on? I want to go too fast. Okay, next one, I would like to direct at Bruce, because he's been in both the public and private sector, and that is, how can an organization take advantage of compliance frameworks even when it's not bound by law to comply?
Sure, no, and I'll steal Chuck's thunder when we were having our prep meeting for this. I think that, choosing your you can look to other frameworks, other bodies, irrespective of whether or not you're required to comply to them. I mean, steal good ideas regardless of where they're located. So, if there's a framework or a compliance requirement in something that has nothing to do with the industry you're in, but it makes good sense, adopt it, build it in, make it a part of your model. So, definitely, I'm a huge advocate of stealing good ideas wherever they may be. Sorry, Chuck.
Well, I'd give you more.
For stealing it.
Let me give you a little more background on that one. So, as a government agency, we're not bound by, and I'll probably pronounce this wrong, but Sarbanes-Oxley. It's focused on financial institutions, right? But early in my tenure, we had an issue with our ERP system, and we had some paychecks stolen. Not a large amount, very, very small amount. We got in front of, 90% of it. But of course, the ERP people came to me and said, hey, what can we do to make our ERP, our enterprise resource planning system, be more robust? And one of the things we looked at is auditing, So you go look at Sarbanes-Oxley, and they've got a really good list of what you should audit as an information system. Again, we're not bound by that, but there's really good information in there and gives you kind of minimum standards on what to look at to audit for an information system. And there's tons of examples out there, but that's just a kind of a grounded one that lets you understand, even though you're not necessarily tied by law to be compliant with, you should understand the frameworks, what they can offer, and reference them if it makes sense.
I also think that having a common framework can help you when speaking with the business, because if you have a common framework that you can explain and get them to understand the background of the controls and the risks around these different controls, that gives you a common language with which to speak with the business so that you're on the same page. I mean, even though they normally speak in financial terms, you can still tie that into financial outcomes when you're speaking with the business. So that's one way that I use the frameworks that has been really helpful in my position.
Yeah, well, you can see, I hesitated to speak. You can see that. So I have 2 points. If I was giving you practical advice, I would say exactly what they said, right? What do I do about cybersecurity? I comply with applicable standards to me, and if they're unclear or they don't apply, I comply with best practices of the industry. That will keep me out of legal trouble. That's what I would tell you as the practicing lawyer. Now, let me talk like a law professor. The law professor criticism of those standards is that there's no guarantee that they actually meet the risk management goal. Your risk management goal is to spend theoretically up to the point where if you spent more, you would spend more than the expected loss you reduce, right? As the insurance people call this the shopping list problem. How much do I buy, right? Well, you buy up to that point. There's no guarantee that the standards actually effectively approximate that goal. They may. But so that's the problem, theoretical problem in cybersecurity, is to step back from the standards and say, gee, are we really meeting our goal, right? So we got 2 things. The practical advice I give you, and we're going to stick with that, it's hard to get the law professor edge in there and try to get people to think, well, are the standards really effective? So with that, I'll fall quiet again.
Can I just say one thing in response to that? But on the legal side, you have the term of due care,
Yeah.
right? So if you can show that you're at least following a certain standard, a certain framework to the best of your ability or to the best of your risk tolerance, right? If there were a situation, you could show that you're at least adhering to due care, is doing as much as you possibly can, right?
Well, you make a, yeah.
Was
My
that-
short answer is yes, and that was my practical advice. The longer answer is nobody's going to be able to show you're not exercising due care, right? If you adhere to those standards, because we don't have the information we need to come in and say, look, this doesn't meet the goal. This really falls far short of the goal, the ideal goal I pointed out earlier. We just don't have that. And so in situations where the standards are vague, you see exactly what we're talking about and exactly the advice I would give and the practicing lawyers give, do what everybody else does,
Well,
right? And that defends you.
And when I hear you say that, what I hear is the standards are the baseline, right? That's the floor, not the ceiling.
They're yes and no. They're the practical baseline. I absolutely agree. The theoretical baseline, that's the dispute. Have we got the baseline right? Right?
Sure.
But that has nothing to do with the practice. I want to be very clear about that, right? I have two hats on. One is what should you guys do? And you got it absolutely right, right? And then there's the, gee, should we really be doing that hat? And where, welcome to my course.
Well, yeah, sure.
Organization has to say and agree on kind of what the family jewels are. What do we want to protect? You can never protect the whole organization. There's not enough money, right? So I think those are just the guardrails that we have to stay within as we look at what we consider in each of our businesses. What are the family jewels? What do we need to focus on protecting the most? Right? Would anybody like to comment on that or talk about that?
Well, I think NIST addresses that by different categorizations of information and different levels of categorization. So a low baseline versus a moderate versus a high baseline, and the different levels of controls you could put in. So even within a single organization, you can have multiple systems, and the systems all protected differently based on the information they store, process, and transmit. So you're absolutely right. You're not going to try and protect everything at the same level. It gets way too costly. And why are you protecting your least or your most public information to the same level you're protecting your most private? So I think NIST does address that. I don't know that, I think, and a lot of the other frameworks kind of feed off of NIST, such as HIPAA, CGIS, PCI DSS, and they just add a little bit more organizationally defined, or they've defined the organizationally defined values more strict within those frameworks to give you a baseline to follow. But yes, depending on the type of information you're protecting, you're going to want to implement a different level of control within your organization, even multiple levels across multiple systems.
And then I'll just add too, it depends on where that information is sitting. That's where you would have like the majority of your controls, is the criticality of the systems. Like you were bringing up the ERP system, you might have a 30 or 40 controls that specifically are for that ERP system if those are your crown jewels. But then, other systems like file servers, you may not. So it just depends on how you risk rate the criticality of these systems, the criticality of the layers of transportation or transport of that information within your environment. That's where you would want to have your, kind of like your main focus to ensure that you're doing your due care of applying those controls and meeting those standards.
Okay. One more comment? Yeah, so I practically speaking don't disagree with a word of what's been said, but let me suggest that there's something odd about the cybersecurity and the law. If you would ordinarily, we have a reasonableness standard, right? Take reasonable steps to defend your website. And if it were like everything else in negligence, you'd have a range of legal cases from just egregious negligence, right, And then you get up into, you be a spectrum, and you get up into the unclear cases, and you'd have legal decisions, and that spectrum of decisions would tell you what reasonable care is, right, from a legal point of view. What we see in the cases is just the egregious cases, right? That's all you see. So something is different about cybersecurity in the reasonableness standard from our ordinary treatment of negligence, and that is the theoretical concern. My analysis is, well, that's because we've left reasonableness so vague, right, in terms of the actual ideal standard. But something's different, right? Not to disagree at all with the practical advice, but there is something odd going on.
Okay, I'm going to make one quick comment to this before I chime in with the next question. I always tell my cybersecurity management class, hey, you can't spend a penny to defend an inkjet printer, because anything you spend is going to be more than buying a new inkjet printer. So, okay, our next question, I'm going to go right back to Richard here, because this is clearly a law professor question. What cybersecurity-related legal implications and aspects of compliance should be considered?
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask that. It is a terribly complicated question. Let me answer by as briefly as I can telling you what we got, right? So we got what we've been discussing, right? The standards and they spell out specific requirements. On top of that, we've got a bunch of federal and state statutes that tell you to take reasonable steps to secure your websites and your data. And we've got the common law and negligence tells you the same thing, right? And then we've got a bunch of state statutes that do the same thing, and some of those create safe harbors. If you do X, Y, and Z, then you have perfect defense against your suits. And so we've got a mess. We've got the reasonableness standard, which is absolutely the right standard. It's just vague because we don't have the spectrum of cases that lawyers ordinarily look at to tell you what's what, right? That's why we tell you, do what everybody else does. And that is excellent practical advice. But still, we don't have this. We don't have the standards. So, implications for cybersecurity. The one I would stress, right, is the information sharing. Right. We don't have. The reason we can't hit that ideal is we don't have the information about cost of different types of data breaches and the probability of breaches. We have some, but we don't have enough. Right. Ask the insurers. They really want to have that information. Right, because that's how they set premiums, so you can see the problem there. And so the information sharing aspect of the statutes is critically important, not just the standards to prevent unauthorized access, but to share information effectively with others. And so far we've done that we don't have any mandatory information sharing. Right? We only have voluntary. EU has mandatory information sharing now as proposed. So we need some sort of solution to that problem where we're going to stay exactly where I said, egregious cases and no spectrum.
Practitioners, chime in on that.
Well, I'll jump in. I think we are getting closer to that. The federal government is starting to require information sharing in certain pockets. So, for example, the TSA has, over the past year, has been, transportation security agencies, so think airlines, have been mandating timeframes and requirements for information sharing. So I think we're inching there, but you bring up a fantastic point in that, if we're ever really going to, excuse me, tackle the problem and get beyond where we are, we need to figure that out.
Yeah, and I forgot. Yeah, we're inching along, which is good.
Yes.
Any other comments on that one? Okay. I'm going to go back to Bruce with my next question. What are some effective ways of working with compliance auditing and/or monitoring agencies?
Oh my. So I think it gets to a lot of what we've been able to talk about is, being able to show the controls that you have and demonstrate the program in a defensible way. So, whether that is, PCI DSS and showing your auditors that you've got your controls in place around your cardholder data, whether that be HIPAA, and showing that you have identified where your EPHI rests, and that from, kind of cradle to grave, that you're managing and maintaining it. It's being able to tell the story and be able to tell that within the framework, kind of as we've been talking about, the framework of the controls that you've built for your program.
Other folks?
No, go ahead.
In my opinion, first you have to get IT auditors that actually understand IT. That is a bane of my existence over, I don't know. Every IT auditor that has a CISA does not understand IT. And that has been a major problem for me and my teams over the years. I agree with what you're saying as far as being able to show the picture, tell the story. But if they don't understand all of the nuances around that story, it can be very difficult when it comes time for them to approve your evidentiary support or approve your control design. But in working with them, by telling that story, by somewhat educating them on how IT is not the same across the board for every organization, it can prove beneficial, and it helps them in the next go-around when they have to come back, because then they should already be familiar with certain nuances around IT. But that, to me, is how I've been able to work with our IT auditors, and it takes some time, because they switch in and out. They bring in new testers and different levels of IT auditors every year. So it's kind of like round robin that we have to keep going around in circles. And it does frustrate our teams, because when they come in, we expect them to understand just, somewhat of the basics. Not every system, because we do have different types of systems that may not be popular, but just the basics behind IT and how we function and how the controls are applied and how we go about trying to be effective within those controls. Yeah, education of the IT auditor, that's what I was
And your IT auditor thanks you for training their green new testers.
Sure. Sure they do.
I got to tell the old joke. So what are the two biggest lies ever told during a security control assessment? It's, by the assessment team, we're here to help, and the people being assessed, and we're darn glad to see you. But you have to build that relationship that she's talking about. If you're swapping your assessors out every time they come around to do an assessment, you're going to fail, because you have to build that trust. You're giving them access to some of your most critical infrastructure, whether your boss knows it is or not, and they're giving you a report at the end of the day that's telling you kind of, this is where you're doing good and this is where maybe you need some help. So you need to build that trust, that relationship, and really work to have a team that remains somewhat constant. And I know there's a lot of churn in our organizations and a lot of churn in IT in general, and especially on the cybersecurity side. But if you can make an effort to do that, it will pay huge dividends in the past, and you'll end up going out to dinner with, your IT team during the assessment, because it usually ends up being about a week long, when you're out in that organization. You're building that relationship, and they will be happy to see you, and it'll be a much better engagement in the end.
Before I go on to our last question, I'm just going to echo some experience of mine. I've had the fortunate opportunity to be able to interface with a lot of the people who do certifications like ISC Squared. ISC Squared has a certification for accreditation officials, and it's a terrible certification. It calls for like no experience at all, and I've been arguing with ISC Squared for years that should be an add-on to CISSP, that people ought to at least have that level of knowledge before they're being sent out to, look at folks. Okay, the last question I'd like to toss out to the whole panel and have them all address it is, are there any additional insights that you'd like to share before we take questions from our audience? So, whoever wants to start, just jump in.
I don't have an insight, but I do have a question for people. To the extent you have experience with lawyers, do they understand enough technology?
No.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I think it depends, right? And maybe I'm just fortunate that, and it depends, and I'm taking your question with a slight twist. So for example, you know, I'm very fortunate that we have an attorney that just understands HIPAA inside and out, right? So the first time I met her, we sat down for coffee and she said, "Hi, my name's Dory and I'm here to keep you out of jail." And I'm like, you know what? You are now my best friend. So, you know, taking a twist on your question, you know, does she understand technology? Not to the extent that the IT professionals do, but she understands HIPAA inside and out and how it's applied to technology. So I think that's the slight difference to your question.
That was my question, because the law school and IIT's, one of its missions is to produce lawyers with some technology facility, let's say. Right, our alumni ask for it, by the way. They plead with us to produce lawyers with some technological understanding, so you don't have your experience, right? But I'm afraid your experience is more typical than his. So, yeah, I wanted to confirm my suspicion that, you know, that in the next faculty meeting I can say, well, people told me, right? Because we need to go forward, but we do need to go forward, not just on the assessor side, but on the legal advice side, so we can play an effective role.
Well, I mean, IT, cybersecurity, security, information security, it's a broad, very broad topic, it has a large scope. But I think if you have attorneys or that at least understand the basics behind information technology and how you can secure environments, that would help when dealing with them. Because when I speak with some of our attorneys and they don't understand.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they should understand everything, because I am the translator, so I have to translate for them. Yes, when I'm speaking to the business, I have to translate that IT to the business. But to just have that baseline knowledge would be very helpful.
I could not agree more. Ray and I are trying, right? Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me steer it back to the question for the panel, though, which is any additional insights that you want to share before we take audience questions?
Take first swing. All right, I'll take a first swing. I think kind of getting back to what we were talking about earlier, and this is, you know, just hopefully common sense to folks, but, you know, figuring out what your framework is that you're building your program, your controls against, and then building the crosswalk of whatever the compliance requirements, regulations are to that, so that you can say, we're compliant with our program, and here's how our program supports HIPAA, PCI DSS, et cetera. You know, so that way you're not playing whack-a-mole on the standards you've built to your program, and your program addresses their concerns.
And I'll just add, I would recommend that you take a look at your environment and assess your environment as a whole. Risk rate, the criticality of your systems and within your environment, and then apply, as you said, apply the different controls or different frameworks based upon that criticality. Because you need to communicate that to the business. You need to communicate, okay, these are our critical systems, this is the value, if they're, they were lost, but these are the controls that we've built around to help us protect these systems. And that way you can better communicate the risk to the business and then formulate like the financial end of the risk or the loss as well. So I would just recommend that you know your environment as best as you can, where everything is sitting, what your crown jewels are, and then take a look at the frameworks to see which ones would work. And you don't have to stick with just one. Like I think you said it earlier, you can take controls from PCI and insert them into your own framework and then map your controls to the various frameworks out there. That's what we've done. So we have our ITGCs, which IT General Controls, but they map to NIST 53, they map to NIST 171, they map to CMMC or whatever. And then that way you can show that you are exercising due care and trying to adhere to that baseline that you've set as far as, what do you call it, industry standards.
So keeping to the compliance side, so you've got information system owners out there or new owners that are really good at coming up with user requirements for your new information systems. They want, what does your system do for us, or what kind of information does it take in, what are the outputs? And then you've got your GRC personnel that are really good at writing policy and saying your information system has to do all this stuff in order to store, transmit, and process information securely. You need to build out a function in the middle that helps translate between the two, what I call an information system security engineer. And when they're building the system and building the user requirements in, make sure they're building the security requirements right alongside and developing them when your system is being built. Trying to bolt that stuff on later is only going to be more costly, more painful, and in some cases not even, you're not even going to be capable of doing that. So try to build that function to bring those two bodies together in anything that you're producing, new information systems that you're developing in your organization.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left for questions from the audience. So I have a gentleman here with a microphone who's going to get with folks for their questions.
Hey, good morning. So for the CISOs, could you tell us where in the organization you report to today, and importantly, where you think you should be? And for our lawyer friend, same comment from a operational point of view from the law.
Okay, good question.
Go ahead. I'll take a first shot. So I report to the CIO. I know this is a really passionate topic among security professionals. Frankly, I don't care as long as I have the ability to influence the organization to achieve the goals that we need to achieve from a cybersecurity perspective. I think from a city perspective, where we are in our broader IT journey, it completely makes sense for where we are right now, because we need the greatest change and kind of raising the floor, so to speak, in the IT organization. So to be closely coupled and tied there, to me, makes sense today. Does that make sense forever? Likely not. But I'd say for the foreseeable future, it makes sense for our organization.
And I generalized, I think that's the right answer, right? You want to have a reporting structure that makes sense within your organization. So what I would do, even if I were your lawyer, is look at the details of your structure, right? And let's figure out a reporting mechanism that makes sense in light of the statute and your organization, just so that it's effective. Right? So exactly like that. I know that's a typical lawyer answer that doesn't give you the details you want. It just, unfortunately, is the right answer.
So even if he had not introduced himself as the lawyer on the panel, would you have been able to pick him out?
So every job, so at NASA, the CISO reports to the CIO. At Department of Energy, the CISO reports to the CIO. And here at Cook County Government, the CISO reports to the CIO. And it works. And I get the the argument about chief risk officer or should they even retain it. I don't want to see it on the board, my gosh. But going back to your point, if you don't understand IT, what if you're working for someone that doesn't understand IT or the value of IT? So that's why I'm more than happy to sit under the CIO and work for him as his rater, even though I'm overseeing him and the cybersecurity of the information systems that he's responsible for.
I report to the CIO. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, you bring up a good point, understanding IT and being able to have those discussions on a level where the person that you're speaking with understands what you're talking about is crucial. But in prior times, I might have said the CEO, but you do bring up a good point.
I want to comment, kind of what he was saying is, it, in the, right now, there's a lot of conversation saying that when you talk about cyber, is it really technology related, right? Now, you're using technology to drive your results, but is it really technology? And then the other piece that I'd like to hear more about is what's considered sometimes a conflict of interest from the CIO when the CISO goes and says, I need XYZ dollars, and he says, no, because I've got to do XYZ, and you can't have that money.
Well, I think within the construct of your relationship between the CISO and the CIO, IT and security or cybersecurity should be two separate budgets. I mean, they fall underneath the same house, so to speak, but they're in my world, they're two separate budgets. And I have my own, and she has hers. But I could see where that might be a problem, but I think if CISOs are thoughtful in their requests or in their requirements and what they need, that they would probably be able to get, what we need to function to secure our environments.
Thank you. I have to do my role as moderator, and, okay, I'm getting asked if we could do one more question, but it's got to be very quick.
One more question. Good morning. I'm curious, if you're assuming you're following some kind of standards that are guiding your needs in security for your business, what part does risk insurance play in guiding and or forcing you to do things?
Your question is, what part does insurance play in all in?
And assuming cyber insurance?
Cyber insurance. Well, for me, it's I'd say over the past year or two since, was it SolarWinds? Our insurance is really starting to get more vocal and more involved in cybersecurity. They're still learning themselves, right? And they're even coming to us for information, or to me for information about certain aspects of security and cybersecurity and what we're doing, how we're implementing certain things, how effective our controls are. So yes, they're becoming more involved, but I think, at least with my experience, it hasn't been too overbearing. They're not trying to dictate, in my experience.
No, I agree. I feel like the things that we've been asked have been reasonable. They've been common sense.
Right. It's kind of like an audit. I mean, another auditor per se, because now they're sending questionnaires, or they're making you go through different exercises to show that your controls are effective, or at least you're doing something to protect your environment and the crown jewels of the organization.
Yeah, I was just going to add, at the end of the day, on the agenda, Edward will be talking about cyber insurance topics, so make sure you stay tuned for that.
Well, I want to thank our panel very much for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. This has been a great discussion, so thank you, and that concludes this panel.
All right, thank you. We are now moving into our first scheduled break. So 10:30 to 10:45, feel free to step outside for refreshments, coffee. Please join us again at 10:45 and we will continue. Thank you.
So,
We don't get-
we have your slides up here?
Okay, is that a
And-
speaker view, though? That's all right, I have my speaker notes view,
Okay,
low-tech.
so this works for you? This is
Yes.
good? Okay, so it's just forwards, backwards, and that's pretty much all you need to know.
That is true, all I need to know.
And
There
then
are some
microphone's here.
animations.
Just be
Yeah.
kind of careful when if you adjust the mic, because there's a button here that turns it off, or mutes it.
I see, so you have
Yeah.
to,
So if that green light turns off, it's gonna, you're not gonna be heard. That's pretty much.
certainly.
Yeah. But generally, if you keep it right, like if yours here, that should be good.
Failing that, I do know how to project.
Any other questions?
That should do it. We'll
All right.
see. If it doesn't work, well, if technology worked, that's why I have a job.
This is actually a very nice room for panels.
It is, it is.
Absolutely. Be right back. Excuse me.
And one of the things I've learned giving academic lectures in halls, and I've been in halls that were like way bigger than this. The kids that sit like in the top back corner, they think you don't see them. I can see you picking your nose from here. The first time I got in front of a lecture hall when I was in college, it's like, oh crap, you're not hiding from anybody. You are right out there.
Till I came up here, I didn't notice the balcony.
Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started pretty soon, so please find your seats and we will continue. Give everybody a couple more minutes to go ahead and find your seats. Okay, so we'll probably have a few stragglers coming in, but we're gonna go ahead and get started now. So I am going to welcome to the stage Paul Dittman to introduce our next speaker. Paul Dittman.
I guess it's still good morning. Good morning. The topic coming up is fuzzy to focus, making resiliency real. And the speaker today, presenter, will be Walter Leffman, Director of Security at Chicago Trading, where he's responsible for information security, physical security, life safety, disaster recovery, and business continuity. And he is also the 2022 Chicagoland Midcap CISO of the Year. Walter?
Thank you. Can you hear me? If not, the microphone doesn't work. My mouth really does. For some of you who have been at the DePaul Risk Conference or the ISSA chapter this month, this might see a little repeat, so I apologize a little in that. You can grab a coffee, but it is the sermon that I am preaching these days. I'm very passionate about it, which probably means I'm going to run through my slides too fast, but there it is. First, the usual disclaimer. This is all me. I carry all the blame. Everyone else will disavow me. So, talking about resilience, I have some life lessons in resilience myself that help set my mindset, and let me give a little background for me just so that you understand where I come from. I do like to do things for fun that require a little bit of resilience and survivability. That's one. That's great. Skydiving is great. You're 45 seconds from impact when you start. And one way or another, you are going to land. The only thing you're worried about is how fast. So there's a lot of training and thought and planning and resiliency and stuff like that. Another thing I used to do, also for fun, was a volunteer New York City auxiliary police officer and sergeant. So you're out in the street in a uniform, no gun. You have a flashlight and a nightstick and a radio, but what you really have is your wits. And everyone knows who you are, but you don't know what's out there. And many tales, you couldn't make this crap up. Scuba diving. Wreck diving Lake Michigan. Yes, it's very cold. You go inside a 39-degree water wreck in the dark at the bottom of Lake Michigan at 130 feet, and you carry at least 2 of everything you need to live. And then, love to play with sharks. Let's see if I can, no, I can't make the video play. That was a school of hundreds of hammerhead sharks, but more interesting there, where that was, there was lots of current, and if you didn't get down and shelter behind the bommy where the coral was, the current would take you away. And one of our group did manage to get blown away. By the time they hit the surface, they were a mile away. By the time they were picked up, they were 2 miles away. But they had the gear to survive. They had the resiliency. They had the signal inflatable tubes. They had the air horns. And more importantly, they had the marine radio, because at a mile away, that's all that's going to save you. So I do resilient things for fun. So I also, unfortunately, get to do it for work, fortunately. So this is the goal, GCSI, Building Cyber Resilience, Surviving Threats Today and Tomorrow. That was the subtitle. Great goal. I just thought about it more and realized, how do you actually define cyber resilience? What does it mean? Is it 100% prevention and protection? We all know that ship has sailed. High availability, data backup and recovery? Sure, that's definitely part of it. Well, who owns it? CISO? IT? And is it just cyber? And for that matter, what constitutes survival? And who defines that? And as a CISO, as a cybersecurity leader, how do we approach that? Well, the mature CISO and program hits it with a risk-aware, risk-based program. That is currently the modern way. We certainly work to identify the crown jewels, what to protect in the enterprise, prioritize where we spend our limited resources to best effect to prevent loss. We still work hard on prevention, of course. Increasingly, you accept that it will be when, not if, when a problem happens. And we start to pursue recovery capability in our programs as well. Data backup and restore, clearly a biggie, especially with ransomware. We have developed many frameworks to measure risk and report risk and guide the work of our execution teams and prioritize where we spend our resources. Well, here's a question. Which framework is best? And my answer is, it doesn't matter. As long as you have something, and it has to be the right-sized thing, because if you want to go to the full FAIR model and your CFO doesn't even manage their financial risk that tightly, you're just right over their head. But it doesn't matter. You got to have something for sure, just to keep the program in order. But here's the question. Does a risk actually define resilience? I don't think so. Risk-based programs prioritize work and spend. What's important to protect? What should you work on first and next? What should you patch and when? What should we pay attention to? What threats are out there that we should be watching? And what do we want to spend on it? But the focus is usually preventing loss. The methodology is usually bottom up. You've got all these metrics. You got your patching metrics, your threats, your risks, and you try to boil it down to one number for your board sometimes, which is an entirely separate presentation. Recovery is there, but it's often in pieces. It's like I have a piece of technology. How do I make it resilient? High availability, backup and restore, whatnot. All of this contributes to resilience, but it doesn't define it with focus. So now I'm going to go back to my other life, the BC-DR stuff. I've had some lessons in BC and DR that help inform how I'm approaching resilience these days. First lesson from my own company, financial industry. Workstation is dead. Production options trading workstation, got a malware alert. My security operations center, on it, took care of it, isolated it. Cyber resilience check. Found the threat, neutralized the threat. Excellent. Well then the question started from my trading support team. It's like, well, when can we get it back? Can't you scan it and clean it up? How long will it take? Why don't you have a plan for this? It's like, plan? It wasn't my plan. I thought it was your plan. The workstation could die for any number of reasons. Could lose a memory chip, could lose a drive. Anything can go wrong with it. I was just one of the threats. So I didn't have the recovery plan. I assumed you had the recovery plan for what happened when these things happen. Well, there you go. Lesson number one, recovery from cyber events is moving out of InfoSec. It's really, business and business operations thing. And we clearly need some better communication on this to make sure we know who owns the ball. Another feature of my role, as I mentioned, was I do cover business continuity, actual physical security, life safety, business continuity. So the next lesson I had was Hurricane Sandy. We had a plan. It seemed like a solid plan. Plan meets storm. So one observation, you see that lower left-hand side? One of my traders lives in that neighborhood. So he might not be thinking about what to do about recovering CTC that day. And in fact, we certainly had a plan. The scenarios were certainly narrower than reality. That happens a lot. More interestingly, the most interesting thing we learned is our New York staff, who had roles in the plan, suddenly had very different roles. They were working on their homes and their families. So, we did survive, because our basic BCDR approach was less about having a solid, detailed, step-by-step plan than building capabilities, toolboxes of capabilities to conduct business operations. Less about what broke, but how do we actually achieve things? So, first thing, plans don't survive contact or threat. I'm sure that's a duh for everyone else in here, but sometimes it's important to remember that when you're in the trenches, because you're working on plans all day, and it's good to pick up your head and realize that the plan's probably not going to work ultimately. And that it's the capabilities that can adapt and improvise to execute necessary business operations. And that's going to be the key. The necessary business operations is kind of your guide. And one more lesson that actually ties the cyber and BC together fully, ransomware, right? For a long time, cybersecurity and BCDR were kind of separate. I mean, there were big outages and things, but for the most part, it wasn't a DR thing until it was terrible, terrible. And that didn't happen often. Well, now it happens every day. Ransomware immediately brought those two things completely together. The data breaches, they're expensive. You lost data, it'll cost you money, your stock will go down. You probably recover in 2 or 3 years anyway, but it's not usually a firm ending event. Ransomware can be. So the object, gotta go back. Resiliency is key. We've come to that. That's sort of why we have GCSI and we talk about resiliency all the time. But it's not a cybersecurity issue. It's not just a cybersecurity issue. So what is it? How do we focus? It's a key organizational goal now, but it's still kind of fuzzy, at least it was to me. It certainly goes well beyond cybersecurity, as I discovered the hard way, with just taking out one lousy workstation. We have been managing risk in our silo, but we can't just manage risk to prevent loss. We have to manage risk with the goal of assuring essential outcomes. And that is the lens that brings focus to resiliency. And there's a concept that I was introduced to at a conference in 2018, been around a long time, but this is where I got introduced to it, that really resonated with me to help that focus. Mission assurance. Mission assurance, I learned at an NTSC Central Regional CISO Policy Roundtable, a talk by Dr. Kamal Jabbour of the Air Force Research Laboratory. The military has had the concept of mission assurance for a long time. It is the integrated engineering, operations, and planning and design for a full life cycle with the goal of assuring that you can achieve specific outcomes. And they have a very rich and deep methodology. They have mission assurance category levels. They have specific policies, procedures, and metrics and things like that. Your organization, if it's not something that's as vital as the military, doesn't necessarily need to go that far, but I still think the concept will provide the focus that you need. So in the mainstream, what is the benefit? It provides clarity of purpose and a North Star for everyone, but clarity of purpose for and from the executives. They live in the world of the why. Why are we here? What are we supposed to be getting done? Clarity of priorities for the what, which is the risk management program, trying to figure out what to work on in order to support the why. And then clarity of priorities and delivery requirements for the how, the execution teams that are just getting the work done every day. It's cross-disciplinary in all of org. You're no longer alone. Cyber resilience isn't a thing that can stand alone. It gets buy-in and focus and funding org-wide, and it informs everything. It should inform your design, your engineering, your process and policies, incident response, operations, budgets, and of course, cyber resiliency falls into there. So great. Well, it's ever evolving and adapting too. It always things. I will say there are layers and there are traps. We'll get to that. So, resiliency is our mission. Got it. Oh, okay, now what's the mission? Oh, yeah. There are certainly everyday critical missions. This is what you do every single day to make money for your company. It's what you get measured on for your performance reviews typically. It's how your normal budgeting and all of that. What I'm going to ask to focus on, especially for resiliency, what I call core missions. There are deep down, fundamental core missions that address survival under duress. And unless you have a big, complicated program like the military, I have a simple litmus test for how to find your core missions. It's the thing where failure is not an option, where if you start to talk to someone and say, I can't do X or it's down, they say, yeah, fine, we'll fix it tomorrow. When you hit the right one, they'll say, no, this is it. You can't not do that. Let me give some examples, both of missions and mostly core missions. So my first example is the airline industry. Day-to-day mission is very clear. You load the passengers and cargo, you take off on time, you fly, you land on time, you deliver the passengers and cargo. All the operations, most of the risk management, most of the resiliency is focused on that mission. But when faced with serious disruption, the core mission gets laid bare. And I remind you of Flight 1549 in January 2009. There's the core mission. no casualties. Every takeoff is optional, every landing is mandatory. And in 1 minute for that flight, the core mission became the only mission. Fortunately, the US airline industry is very good at keeping a clear focus on that core mission and does a good job funding, maintaining the training, gear, protection, procedures, response and recovery capabilities for all of that. It can be challenging. They just canceled the flight and everyone deplaned. But she later came across the pilot in the airport on a payphone. There was no office in there or anything like that. It's a reputable major US airline, but it's just a small regional airport. So the pilot was using the payphone to contact the home office. And she overheard one sentence, which really stuck in my head. The pilot was saying, no, I'm the pilot and we're not flying that aircraft. And so I'm reading a little into this, but what I'm seeing is that the pilot is focused on the core mission. Guy on the other side of the phone is focused on the day-to-day mission. You need to get that plane going. You got to get that flight done. The good news is the pilot was in the position to make the call, right? And keep that focus on the core mission. Another story I have for keeping an eye on the core mission is, it's easy to follow best practices without testing it against your mission. And this example is a finance industry security one. So I used to work for a somewhat large bank that got a new CISO. He gathered his entire global team together for a conference. Among the other things in the conference, we saw presentations from vendors on products they were trying to sell us. And after one of them, the product was an access and authorization entitlement control system for our money movement systems, how we move capital in the company. And when the vendor left, the CISO took a poll, and there were 65 people in the room. He says, how many people think this system should fail closed? What do you think? Most of them raised their hands because that's the security canon. Security fails closed. How many people think this should fail open? 2 people raised their hands. When asked why, they recited the core mission of the firm. It's like, if I fail closed, we don't move any money. We don't move any money, we're out of business overnight. If I fail open, we may lose tens of millions of dollars to fraud, mistakes, and errors, whatever. We're still in business in the morning now. They realized that the core mission was moving the money. Even if you're losing some of it, it was still better. I'm happy to say that I was one of the 2 people. The object lesson. Core always trumps the daily mission. Don't lose sight of it. The operations must include decision makers with focus on the core mission and the authority to act. We'll get to that in another example in a minute. And all voices that speak to the core mission must be sought and heard. Dissenting voices especially, and voices from all levels in the org. Well, I was at the bottom of the org. Fortunately, the other guy who raised his hand was the CISO, so he didn't have that problem. He could make that influence, but that doesn't always happen. I think of space shuttle disasters and how little important tidbits were buried in the bottom of PowerPoint slides, and engineers didn't feel like walking in front of the press and saying, "You really shouldn't do this." You need to find ways to expose those voices. Next trap, not seeing the connection to the core mission. Something that you thought was inconsequential, but really strikes to the heart of your organization. This example is back to the finance industry, Knight Capital. I don't know if any of you remember Knight Capital. They were a major trading operation, 17% of US equities trading, Knight Capital. They experienced what was essentially a firm-ending event with a trading error that lost $460 million. The cause was one specific automated trading system, retail liquidity program, relatively minor P&L operation, not the top of priority attention for support and operations, QA. On the day in question, the triggering event was a mere 212 small retail orders. In a discussion I attended analyzing the event, some of the contributing factors to what happened, they had a software update, followed by a failed rollback, challenges monitoring the market positions and risks, challenges getting support engaged, challenges getting rapid decisions escalated and made while the problem was happening. In 45 minutes or so, 4 million orders were placed into the market. The SEC noted, lots of gaps in the transition, in the management there. what is my lesson? Every operation and every procedure, old or new, has to be held up to that litmus test. Is it related to your core mission? In a trading firm, core mission is you have to know your position in the market and you have to be able to manage that risk. Anything that puts orders in the market has a direct line to your beating heart. Because once it's in the market, if you can't find it, you can't manage it, your firm could end immediately. So no matter how small it is, always check whether it's touching your core mission. And then if it does, nothing gets a pass from the highest level of mission assurance. Oh, again, back. What's the mission? How do you find that mission? It's a good question. I'll give you a hint. No one team can do it, not even your exec and board. They probably don't know either in many ways. The two effective approaches I have found is to stress test your mission, both hypothetically and in real life. Hypothetically, the incident response tabletop exercise is your best thing. No matter how lightweight it is, you're gonna learn something, especially when you start to poke at things that might be part of your mission. And after-action review of incidents that you do survive is also critical. But here's the thing, the deep review. You're going to invest more in the after-action review for a trivial incident than you think is wildly worthwhile. But that's where you do your learning. You pay back that tuition that you've already paid. You had the incident. Get the most out of it that you possibly can. The other note here, I said, the tabletop is only useful if it involves all the stakeholders. Because like I said, no one person has the puzzle. I actually found out some of the most interesting technical things that we needed to be resilient on from our CFO. So if our CFO wasn't there, our chief legal officer wasn't there, our chief compliance officer wasn't there, with the tech team responding to a ransomware tabletop, we would not have gotten clarity on some of the things we needed to know. And certainly, the consultant who helped us with that tabletop said of all the orgs he's worked on, and he works at an incident response consultancy, so he sees a lot of dead bodies on the floor, so to speak. He said the ones that do these broad tabletops, those are the ones that tend to survive most, even if they have technical gaps in their cybersecurity technology and teams. Oh, I am going fast. I'm already to the wrap-up. Mission assurance, I think, is the pinnacle of resiliency thinking. It brings focus to building resiliency for cyber and for everything. It speaks to all levels of the org, especially your board and executives, because they are thinking about accomplishing things, not whether your backups can be restored. They just want to know whether they can do business. It clarifies and crystallizes decisions and puts them in the right hands. Once you realize that something you need to do for an incident response to maintain your core mission needs to be in that frontline operations hands to be done fast enough. If you have to call your CEO, you're probably underwater before it's all over. And it cuts through distraction and complacency. If you can tie it to the core mission, everyone can get that. So the takeaways that I would say are important. Clearly identify your missions, day-to-day, of course, but the core missions, and understand the difference between those two. Certainly, during our tabletop, one of the interesting things I thought was a core mission was protection of intellectual property. I spent a lot of time and effort on that. And during the exercise, besides the ransomware, one of the injects was, hey, we stole all your source code. And everyone looked at me and goes, whatever. So I was like, okay, if you're investing a lot in this, but right now, that didn't seem to be up there. And yes, there's triage for the immediate ransomware, but project. Oh wait, now it's 100.
What do we do? What is our core mission? Got it. All right.
All right, are we getting an echo still?
Again, depending on the state that you're dealing with.
Tools that need to be withheld. There are also withholding of grants. There are lots of ways that governments, tend to penalize companies, that have significant problems in this particular area. So when you're in this heavily regulated industry, you need to have a very robust security. And just
because we need energy for society to function properly, right? So the government's coming in, they're setting your risk tolerance, they're setting very specific procedures and processes that you're going to do.
You lose qualified immunity. We don't want to get sued.
So you make sure that you cover all the bases. Quite frankly, if you follow all of the rules, no one can sue you.
I think we all have concerns about certain regulations if we handle credit card data, if we have employee health information, you know, things like that. But in the heavily regulated industries, the impact can be of different regulations when it comes to privacy.
That way, from people like us. Over there is Mark Shipman. He and I used to work at a company called Vibes.
That other regulations require you to do, especially around things like risk management and privacy. Although the newer version, they do control mappings for you, don't really understand the
2018, you know, they also have some regulatory powers. So, insurance companies are looking for 12 controls, right? 12 key controls, and he mentioned one of those, you know, privileged identity management.
ascertaining you're taking on when it comes to infrastructure, IT, as it relates to cyber.
I think the one advice I'll give is a general, do it well. Yeah, be in pretty good shape.
All right, let's thank our panel for an excellent discussion. And if you do have any additional questions, then please.
And there's no team on that side maybe, right? And then
Yeah, like maybe whoever doesn't need a script can, you know, be on the other side or.
yeah, so I would personally want to look at the slide
Yeah.
while I'm talking because I know what they're saying. So if we're over there, we're not going to be able to.
Yeah,
see.
that's
So
true.
It's fine. I think we can just use the podium. Sure, I'll just. Yeah, PowerPoint or what?
No, just. Actually, just. File, do file.
Yeah, no.
Do file.